Armin loved hiking more than anything. He was a quiet man who worked in a small bookshop in the city, but every weekend he left everything behind and went to explore the wild. He liked the silence of the forest, the songs of birds, and the soft touch of wind on his face. It made him feel free. One Saturday morning, Armin packed his backpack with water, snacks, a flashlight, and his camera. He chose a new path this time, a trail that few people knew about. The locals said it went deep into the forest and was not easy to follow. But Armin was curious. He wanted to see what lay beyond the hills and rivers. The first few hours of his hike were calm. He walked through tall trees, stepped over roots, and crossed small streams. The air was fresh and sunlight fell through the leaves like golden dust. Armin took pictures of birds and old tree trunks covered with moss. He felt peaceful, but as he went deeper, the forest grew quiet. The wind stopped blowing and even the birds went silent. The path became narrow and overgrown. Armin checked his map but soon realized that the trail he was on was not marked. He was somewhere new, a place hidden from others. He stopped to drink water and looked around. That was when he saw it. At the far end of the forest, beyond a group of thick trees, stood a large gate made of rusted iron. Vines climbed all over it, and half of it had fallen to the side. Behind it, Armin could see the top of a roof and the corner of a large building. He frowned. A building this deep in the woods? It made no sense. He pushed the gate open with effort. It creaked loudly, breaking the silence. As he stepped inside, he felt a strange chill in the air. The forest behind him seemed darker now. What stood before him was a mansion. It was huge, built of stone and wood, but it was old and broken. Windows were shattered. The doors hung loose and the garden was overgrown with weeds. The once beautiful walls were covered in green moss and cracks. Yet there was something majestic about it. Something powerful that time could not destroy. Armin walked slowly toward the entrance. He saw old cars in the yard covered in dust and leaves. Their tires were flat and the metal was eaten by rust. A broken fountain stood in the middle, dry for many years. He took pictures, feeling both scared and amazed. The mansion looked like something out of a forgotten story. At the door, he hesitated. It was half open, swinging slightly in the wind. He could smell old wood and dust from inside. He turned on his flashlight and stepped in. The air inside was heavy. Dust floated everywhere. Broken furniture lay scattered on the floor. The walls had pictures, their glass cracked, showing faces of people dressed in old clothes. They looked serious and proud. Armin moved from one room to another. The place was huge. There was a grand hall with a staircase that went up in a wide curve. The steps were covered with a red carpet, faded and torn. A chandelier hung above, filled with cobwebs. It must have once shone like crystal. He went into a dining room where a long table still stood. Plates, glasses, and silverware were there, but covered in dust. It looked like someone had left in a hurry, leaving everything behind. In the next room, he found shelves full of books. Many had fallen to the ground. He picked one up and blew the dust off. The title was in another language. He placed it back and continued to explore. Armin found something strange in one of the smaller rooms. There were old papers spread across a desk. He looked closer. Some of them had numbers and names written on them. Others had drawings of buildings and cars. One paper had a list of people with marks beside their names. He felt uneasy. The handwriting was bold and rough. It did not look like ordinary notes. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound. It came from upstairs, a soft thud like something falling. Armin froze. He listened, holding his breath. The sound came again, a little louder. He told himself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon or a bird trapped inside. Still, his heart began to beat fast. He slowly walked to the staircase, shining his flashlight upward. Every step creaked as he climbed. The hall above was dark and the smell of dust was stronger. He reached the top and saw several doors on both sides. One of them was slightly open. He walked toward it, feeling a strange pull. He pushed the door open with care. Inside was a bedroom. The bed was large but covered in torn sheets. A mirror stood in one corner, cracked down the middle. There was a dresser with an old clock on it. The clock had stopped long ago. Armin looked around and noticed something on the floor near the bed. It was a small wooden box half open. He knelt down and picked it up. Inside were several photographs. He took one out and looked closely. It showed a group of men in suits standing near a car. They looked strong and serious, their faces cold. One man in the center had a scar on his cheek and wore a black hat. There was something powerful about him, a presence that made the others stand behind him like guards. Armand turned the photo around. On the back, someone had written a single word: family. He looked at the other pictures. Some showed the same men sitting around a long table smoking cigars. Others showed them with bags and boxes that looked heavy. In one photo, the man with the scar was shaking hands with another man in a police uniform. Armand felt a chill. He realized what this place might be. This was no ordinary mansion. This had been the home of a Mafia family. The papers downstairs, the cars outside, the pictures. Everything fit together now. The house must have been their base, hidden deep in the woods where no one would find them. But what happened to them? Why was it abandoned? As he thought about it, the sound came again, this time from the hallway. It was a slow creak like someone walking. Armand turned around quickly, shining his flashlight toward the door. The hallway was empty, but the light flickered for a moment. He swallowed hard. Maybe it was just the wind, he told himself. But the air felt colder now. He decided to leave the room and return downstairs. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed something he had not seen before, a faint light coming from under one of the doors at the end of the hall. It was a soft, yellow glow. As if a lamp or candle was still burning inside, Armand stared at it, confused. The mansion had no electricity. How could there be light? He hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. Then he took a deep breath and began to walk slowly toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall. The air around him grew heavy again, and the light under the door seemed to move slightly, like it was alive. Armand reached out and placed his hand on the handle. His fingers trembled. Then, with one slow push, he opened the door. What he saw inside made his heart skip a beat. Armand froze as the door opened. The room was dim, filled with a weak yellow glow coming from a small oil lamp on a table. The flame flickered slowly, making the shadows on the wall dance. For a moment, Armand could not move. His mind was full of questions. Who lit this lamp? Was someone living here? He stepped inside carefully. The air was warmer here, and it smelled faintly of smoke and old paper. The room was small, with only a table, a few chairs, and a large wardrobe in the corner. On the table lay more papers and a half-open notebook. Armand placed his flashlight down and looked around. The walls were covered with old photographs. They were similar to the ones he had found in the box downstairs. Men in dark suits, cars, and gatherings around large tables. Some of the pictures were pinned with small notes written in red ink. He leaned closer and saw words like meeting, shipment, and warned. He flipped open the notebook. The handwriting was rough and hurried. The first page had dates and short notes written next to them. Most were crossed out, but the last few lines caught his attention. It said, "We must hide the chest before they arrive. The boss ordered it. No one must know. If anyone comes here, they must not find it." Armand frowned. A chest? Hidden somewhere in this mansion? The words sounded serious, almost like a warning. As he turned the page, he heard a soft noise from behind. He looked up quickly, shining his flashlight toward the wardrobe. The door of the wardrobe moved slightly. It creaked just a little. Armand felt his heart jump. He took a slow step closer. The sound came again, like something brushing against wood. He held his breath and reached for the wardrobe handle. His hands were shaking. He pulled the door open. Inside was nothing but old coats, some dusty boxes, and a small empty shelf. The noise stopped. He stared for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing happened. He laughed nervously, trying to calm himself. It was probably a rat or maybe the wind moving through the cracks. Still, he could not shake the feeling that someone had been in this room not long ago. The oil lamp, the notebook, the open wardrobe. Everything felt too fresh for a place that had been abandoned for years. He picked up the notebook again and flipped through more pages. In the middle, he found something folded between them. It was a small map drawn by hand. The drawing showed the layout of the mansion, the main hall, the staircase, several rooms, and what looked like a basement. A red circle was drawn around the basement with a mark beside it that said safe. Armand's eyes widened. A hidden safe in the basement. Maybe that was where the chest was. He placed the map carefully in his bag and decided to go down. As he turned to leave the room, the lamp flickered again and went out. Darkness filled the room instantly. Armand grabbed his flashlight and stepped back into the hallway. The air was colder now, and he could hear faint wind whistling through broken windows. The hallway seemed longer than before. He hurried toward the staircase, feeling uneasy. When he reached the ground floor, he noticed something new. The front door he had left slightly open was now completely shut. He stopped. He was sure he had left it open. He walked closer and tried to push it. It did not move. It was locked from the inside. A strong chill ran through him. Someone else was here. He turned around quickly, scanning the room with his flashlight. The beam of light moved across the broken furniture and dusty floor. Nothing. But he could not ignore the sound of faint footsteps somewhere deeper inside the mansion. He followed the sound slowly, careful not to make noise. It led him toward the kitchen area, where the air smelled damp and moldy. The room was full of broken dishes and old metal pots. A door in the corner led to a staircase going down in the basement. Armin stood there, staring into the dark hole below. The steps were narrow and covered in dirt. Cold air rose from the basement like a breath from the earth itself. He took a deep breath and went down. Each step creaked under his shoes. He shined his flashlight ahead and saw old shelves, barrels, and piles of junk. The place smelled of dust and rust. He looked around, remembering the map. There should be a safe somewhere on the far wall. He moved boxes and old wooden crates, searching for anything unusual. After several minutes, he saw a large metal panel behind a pile of bricks. It looked like part of the wall, but a faint line around it showed it could open. He brushed off the dirt, revealing a heavy iron door with a round handle. This must be it. The safe. He tried to turn the handle, but it did not move. It was locked tight. He looked around for something to help, maybe an old tool or a metal rod. After a few minutes of searching, he found a broken iron bar near the stairs. He used it to pull at the handle, trying to force it open. The sound echoed in the basement as he struggled. Then with a loud click, the door finally gave way and opened slightly. Armin stepped back, breathing hard. Inside the small hidden space was a wooden chest. It was large, with metal edges and a heavy lock that had already rusted. He felt a mix of fear and excitement. This was what the notebook had mentioned. The chest that must be hidden from everyone. He knelt down and wiped the dust off the top. The chest looked old but strong. He pressed the lock, and to his surprise, it broke off easily. The metal had become weak with time. He lifted the lid slowly. Inside were stacks of papers, envelopes, and several small boxes. He opened one of the boxes and saw old coins shining under the flashlight. Another box had jewelry, rings, gold chains, and stones that still sparkled even after years in the dark. Armin could not believe his eyes. The chest was full of valuable items, but what caught his attention most were the envelopes. He opened one and found photographs and documents. The pictures showed the same Mafia men again, but now some were circled with red ink. The papers had lists of names and numbers, possibly records of deals or money. There was also a small notebook inside the chest. Its first page had a message written in large letters. "If you are reading this, leave now." Armin froze. His heart started beating faster. The handwriting looked the same as the one in the notebook upstairs. He looked around the basement, suddenly aware of every sound. The air felt heavier. Then he heard a loud noise from upstairs while something fell hard enough to shake the floor. It was followed by a dragging sound. Armin grabbed his flashlight and looked at the staircase. The light barely reached the top, but he could see movement. A shadow passed by for a moment, then disappeared. He closed the chest and stepped back, trying to think. Should he hide? Should he run? He decided to quietly climb the stairs to see what was happening. As he reached halfway, he noticed the front door was now wide open again. The cold wind blew in, carrying leaves and dust inside. He looked toward the doorway, trying to see if someone was there. But before he could take another step, he noticed something else. A faint figure standing near the window in the hall. It was not clear, only a dark shape that did not move. Armin's grip on the flashlight tightened. He blinked, but the figure was still there, facing him. He called out softly, "Who is there?" The figure did not answer. Then slowly it turned its head toward him. Armin felt the blood rush in his ears. His voice failed him. The figure took one step forward, silent and steady, and that was when Armin realized he was not alone in the mansion anymore. Armin stood frozen on the staircase, his flashlight shaking in his hand. The figure near the window did not move. It was only a dark shape against the pale light coming from outside. For a few seconds, the mansion was silent except for the faint sound of wind moving through the broken windows. Then the figure took another step forward. Armin's heart pounded hard. He wanted to speak, but his throat felt dry. He raised the flashlight and pointed it at the shape. The beam of light fell on an old coat hanging loosely on a stand near the wall. Armin let out a shaky breath. It was only a coat, nothing else. His own fear had fooled him. He laughed quietly and lowered the flashlight, feeling both foolish and relieved. But the relief did not last long. He still remembered the noise he had heard earlier. Someone or something had moved upstairs and closed the door before he found the chest. The wind alone could not do that. He went to the front door to check. It was now open wide again, just like before. The heavy wooden door swung lightly in the cold air. He stepped outside and looked around. The yard was quiet, the trees still and the sky turning gray as the evening approached. He thought about leaving. He could return later with help, maybe bring the police or someone who could understand what this place really was. But his curiosity was stronger than his fear. The notebook, the map, the hidden chest, everything told him there was more to this mansion than just old secrets. Armin turned back inside and closed the door again. He needed to know what had happened here. He decided to explore the rooms he had not checked yet. Maybe there were more clues that could explain the story of the people who had lived here. He walked through a hallway that led to the back of the mansion. The air was damp and filled with the smell of old wood. He found a small study room with a desk covered in dust. Papers and letters were scattered everywhere. He wiped off the dirt from one of them and began to read. The letter was dated many years ago and written in neat handwriting. It said, "To the family, we must keep all records safe. No one must ever find the list. The police are closing in. Burn everything if they come." Armin realized that this was no simple family. This was a mafia group that had hidden here long ago, using this place as their headquarters. The letter spoke about money, deals, and people they needed to keep silent. He read more and saw names that matched those on the papers from the chest. One letter mentioned a man called Malik, the one with the scar from the photographs. It said, "Malik does not trust anyone anymore. He believes there is a traitor among us." Armin remembered the photo where Malik stood in the center wearing a black hat. His face had a look of authority and cold control. Maybe this Malik was the leader of the group. He searched the room and found a drawer locked tight. He pulled hard until it opened. Inside was a small metal box. It was filled with old photographs and a torn diary. The diary was written in the same handwriting as the notes from before. The first few pages were about daily events, meetings, plans, and small details. But then the words changed. They became darker and shorter. It said, "Someone has betrayed us. The boss is angry. There is talk of hiding the gold before anyone else finds it." Then another line said, "We heard noises in the forest last night. They are coming for us." Armin closed the diary slowly. His hands were trembling. It was clear that something terrible had happened here. The people who lived in this mansion had feared for their lives. Maybe they had been caught or killed. Maybe they had vanished before the police could reach them. He looked around the study again and noticed another door in the corner, smaller and half hidden behind a shelf. He pushed the shelf aside with effort. The door creaked as it opened. Behind it was a narrow passage that led downward, smaller than the main stairs. The air coming from it was cold and smelled of soil. Armin hesitated. He turned on his flashlight again and stepped inside. The passage was long, with walls made of stone. It felt like a tunnel built under the mansion. The floor was uneven and covered with dirt. After a few steps, he reached a small underground room. There were wooden crates piled against the wall, some broken open. Inside them were empty bottles, old papers, and rusted metal pieces. But one crate caught his eye. It was newer than the others and had a symbol burned on it, a circle with a cross in the center. He opened it carefully. Inside were several small packages wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped one and found small gold bars shining faintly under the light. His breath caught in his throat. The chest upstairs had been full of coins and jewelry, but this was pure gold. Whoever the Mafia had been, they were far richer than he had imagined. Armin's mind raced. This discovery could make him famous, but it also felt dangerous. Whoever owned this gold might not have left it willingly. As he stood there thinking, he heard a soft tapping sound from the tunnel behind him. It was slow and steady, like footsteps on stone. He turned around quickly, shining the flashlight down the passage. No one was there. The tunnel was empty, but the sound continued. It echoed faintly, coming closer. He backed away slowly. The tapping stopped, replaced by a faint whisper so soft he almost thought it was his imagination. Then something fell behind him, a wooden plank sliding off one of the crates. Armand turned around again, breathing fast. The air seemed thicker now, heavy with something unseen. He decided to leave the tunnel. He climbed back up through the narrow passage and returned to the study. The room looked the same, silent and dusty. But as he turned toward the hallway, he noticed something strange. The photographs on the wall had changed. One of them, the photo of Malik with his men, had fallen to the floor. When Armand picked it up, he saw a new mark on it, a red circle drawn around his own face in the reflection of the glass. His hands shook as he dropped the photo. How could that be possible? He had not seen anyone in the mansion, yet something or someone had marked that picture. He grabbed his bag, ready to leave. He walked toward the front door again, but it was closed tight once more. No matter how hard he pulled, it did not open. He ran toward the window and tried to break the glass, but it was too strong. Even though it looked old and cracked, it was as if the house itself did not want to let him go. The lights from his flashlight began to flicker. The battery was running low. The shadows in the corners seemed to move. He heard faint whispers again, voices he could not understand. Armand backed away slowly, his breathing heavy. He looked at the staircase leading upstairs. There was faint light again coming from the room he had entered earlier, the one with the oil lamp. But he knew he had seen the lamp go out. Still, the yellow glow was there, moving gently as if someone was inside again. He hesitated. He wanted to run, but he also wanted answers. Maybe someone really was there, someone who could explain what this mansion was hiding. He walked up the stairs once more, one step at a time. The glow from the room grew brighter. The air was warmer again. When he reached the top, he saw the door half open, just like before. He slowly pushed it with his hand. The room was empty. The lamp was lit, burning steady. But this time, on the table beside the lamp, there was something new. A piece of paper with his name written on it in bold letters. Armand stared at it, frozen. His name was written clearly, as if someone had known he would come here. His heart pounded harder than ever. He stepped closer, afraid but unable to stop himself. The paper had only 2 words written under his name. "We are waiting." Armand stared at the paper in disbelief. His name was written in clear black ink, and the words "We are waiting" were under it. His mind felt blank. How could anyone know his name? He had never told anyone he was coming here. He had not met a single soul on the trail. The mansion was supposed to be abandoned. He looked around the room, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The lamp's yellow light made long shadows dance on the cracked walls. The table, the photographs, the notebooks, everything looked the same as before, but the silence was thicker now, almost alive. Armand picked up the paper carefully and turned it over. The back was blank. He touched the ink with his finger. It was still wet. Someone had written this just moments ago. His heart pounded harder. He felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Whoever was here, they were not trying to hide anymore. They wanted him to know. They were leaving signs for him to follow. Armand took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "I need to stay calm." He placed the note in his bag and decided to search the upper floor again. Maybe he could find a clue about who was behind all this. He walked through the hallway. The old wooden floor creaked under his steps. The air was colder near the windows, and every sound echoed around him. He opened each door one by one. Most of the rooms were empty, filled with broken furniture and dust. In one room, he found a large mirror leaning against the wall. It was covered with dirt, but he could still see his reflection faintly. He wiped the glass with his sleeve. His tired face looked back at him, eyes wide, hair messy. But as he moved the flashlight, he noticed something strange. Behind his reflection, deep inside the mirror, there was another shape. A figure standing in the corner of the room, still and silent. Armand spun around quickly, his heart jumping to his throat. The room behind him was empty. He turned back to the mirror. The shape was gone. He stepped back, feeling cold sweat on his forehead. He told himself it was just his imagination, maybe a trick of the light. But deep down, he knew it was something else. He left the room and hurried downstairs again. He needed to get out. The mansion was too strange, too alive. Every corner felt like it was watching him. When he reached the main hall, the front door was still locked tight. He tried pushing it again, but it did not move. The sound of the hinges echoed through the house like a deep groan. He turned toward the windows. The sky outside had turned dark. Night had fallen and the forest was quiet. He could see no stars, only the shapes of tall trees swaying in the wind. Armin felt trapped. He needed another way out. He thought about the tunnel under the mansion. Maybe it led somewhere beyond the forest. If he could find the end, he might escape. He went back to the study where the secret passage had been. The shelf was still pushed aside, and the dark hole yawned behind it. He took out his flashlight and stepped inside again. The tunnel seemed longer this time. His footsteps echoed off the stone walls. He passed the crates and the gold he had found earlier. Everything looked the same, but something felt different. The air was heavier, and there was a faint sound in the distance, like whispering voices carried through the tunnel. He followed the sound carefully. It grew clearer as he went farther. The voices were low and serious, like people talking in secret. He turned a corner and saw a faint light ahead, flickering like a candle. He stopped and turned off his flashlight. The light came from a small open space at the end of the tunnel. He could see shadows moving slowly on the walls. He stepped closer, silent as he could be, and looked inside. There were 3 figures sitting around a wooden table. They looked like men, dressed in old-fashioned coats and hats. Their faces were hidden in the shadows. On the table in front of them were piles of papers, coins, and an oil lamp that gave off the faint light. Armin's breath caught in his throat. He blinked, and in that second the figures vanished. The chairs were empty. The lamp was still burning, but no one was there. He stepped into the small room, shaking. The air felt strange, colder than before. The lamp flickered as if touched by invisible hands. On the table, he saw something new, another piece of paper. He picked it up and read the words written in the same black ink. It said, "The truth is buried under our name. Find the mark of Malik." Armin repeated the words under his breath. The mark of Malik. He remembered the name from the letters and the photographs. Malik had been the leader of the group. Maybe this was a clue to where the real secret was hidden. He looked around the small room, shining his flashlight on the walls. They were covered in dirt and cracks, but in one corner he saw a symbol carved into the stone, a circle with a cross in the center. It was the same symbol that had been burned onto the crate of gold. He walked closer and ran his hand over it. The carving was deep and old. Beneath it, the stone felt hollow. He hit it lightly with his hand and heard a dull echo. There was space behind it. Armin searched for something to use as a tool. He found a metal rod lying on the ground and began to dig at the cracks around the stone. Dust filled the air as he worked. The stone loosened slowly. After a few minutes, it slid forward and revealed a small hollow space behind it. Inside was a small wooden box covered in dirt. Armin pulled it out and opened it. Inside were photographs, old letters, and a single black and white picture of Malik himself. He was standing in front of the mansion, smiling faintly. On the back of the photo was a short note written in the same handwriting as before. It said, "If this place is ever found, our story must not die. We buried our truth where it all began." Armin stared at the note. The truth buried where it all began. Could that mean somewhere in the mansion itself? Maybe the main hall or even the garden outside? He decided to return upstairs and search. He climbed out of the tunnel carrying the box with him. The mansion was silent when he entered the hall again, but the lamp upstairs was still glowing faintly. He looked around carefully, noticing the old fountain outside through the window. The garden had looked ordinary before, but now the words in the note made him think again. Maybe that was where the truth was buried. He stepped outside through a broken side door and walked toward the fountain. The moonlight fell softly on the yard, making the stone surface shine. The fountain was dry and full of leaves and dirt. He knelt beside it and brushed away the debris. Something caught his eye, a metal plate fixed to the base of the fountain. It was covered in rust, but he could still read the words engraved on it. It said, "For Malik, the man who built this home." Armin's eyes widened. This was it. The fountain was dedicated to Malik himself. If the truth was buried where it all began, then this was the place. He began to dig with his hands. The soil was cold and hard, but he kept going. After a few minutes, his fingers hit something solid. He brushed away more dirt and uncovered a small metal container. He pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside was a book wrapped in cloth. The pages were yellow and fragile. It was written by Malik himself. The first page said, "This is our story." The mansion was not built for greed. It was built for safety, for those who lost their homes to war. But we were betrayed, and now our name carries shame. If anyone finds this, know that not all of us were guilty. Armin read every word slowly. The Mafia story was not completely true. Malik had tried to protect people, but some members of his group had turned the mansion into a base for crime. The police came and everything was destroyed. As Armin closed the book, he heard the wind pick up again. The trees rustled loudly, and the mansion behind him seemed to sigh. He looked back at the glowing windows. The yellow light from the upstairs room was fading slowly. He held the book close and whispered, "I will tell your story." But just as he turned to leave, he saw something move in one of the windows, the faint shadow of a man wearing a black hat watching him silently. The next morning the air was cold and heavy with silence. Arjun woke early and sat beside the broken fireplace, staring at the last embers that still glowed faintly. His mind was full of questions that had no answers. He could not forget the words carved on the stone and the name of the family that once ruled the mansion. Something deep inside told him that there was still more hidden beneath the house. He decided that before leaving he would uncover whatever secret the place was guarding. He walked through the empty halls once more. The wooden floors creaked beneath his boots and dust floated in the sunlight coming through broken windows. He reached the main hall where the family portraits hung. Their eyes seemed to follow him wherever he went. He looked closer at one portrait and noticed that the frame was slightly crooked. When he adjusted it, a small click came from behind the wall. His heart jumped. He pushed the portrait aside and found a small metal switch. Without thinking much, he pressed it. A loud noise echoed through the hall. The floor near the grand piano began to move. Slowly, a section of the floor slid open, revealing a hidden staircase that led underground. Arjun took a deep breath and stepped down carefully with his flashlight in hand. The air grew colder and thicker as he descended. The stairs ended in a narrow tunnel built with old stone bricks. Strange symbols were carved along the walls. He followed the path until he reached a heavy metal door covered in rust. With a little effort, he managed to pull it open. Inside the room were rows of wooden boxes stacked against the wall. On the floor lay a table with papers spread across it. He wiped off the dust and looked closer. The papers were old bank documents with seals from another country. There were maps, coded messages, and black and white photographs of men in suits standing beside expensive cars. He realized these were the records of the Mafia that once lived here. They had hidden all evidence of their business beneath the mansion. Arjun opened one of the boxes and gasped. Inside were bars of gold wrapped in old cloth. The metal still shone despite the years. He could not believe what he was seeing. The stories about the Mafia family were true. They had built their empire through secret trade and had hidden their wealth deep underground when things turned against them. Arjun sat down on the cold floor trying to take it all in. He knew that this discovery could change his life, but he also felt a deep sense of fear. This was not just treasure. It was a part of a dangerous history that had destroyed many lives. He decided he could not keep it hidden or take it for himself. The truth had to be shared. He climbed back up the stairs and went outside. The sunlight hit his face and the forest seemed calm again. Birds were singing, and the wind moved through the leaves softly as if nature itself was trying to tell him something. He walked down the path until he found a small signal on his phone. He called the local police and told them everything he had found. Within hours, a team of officers and historians arrived. They were shocked when they saw the underground chamber and the gold bars. The place was soon surrounded by police tape, and media reporters started coming from nearby towns. Arjun watched quietly from the side. Reporters tried to talk to him, but he refused to give long interviews. He only said that he had come as a hiker and found what history had forgotten. The authorities later announced that the mansion and everything inside would be turned into a heritage site. The gold and documents would be kept in a museum for research. The story spread across the country, and people were amazed by what had been uncovered. Many called it one of the most important discoveries in recent years for Arjun. It was not about fame or reward. He was just happy that the truth was finally known. He stood on the hill one last time, looking down at the mansion that had once been a symbol of fear and power. Now it would become a reminder of history and a warning about greed. He felt peace in his heart as he started walking back through the forest. The same path that had seemed dark before now looked brighter. The trees whispered softly in the wind and the sunlight danced on the ground. When he reached the edge of the forest, he turned around once more. The mansion stood quietly among the trees, its walls glowing faintly in the evening light. He smiled and whispered a small goodbye before continuing his journey. For him, the adventure had ended, but the story of the mansion had just begun. Historians would study its secrets. Journalists would tell its tale, and travelers would come from far away to see the place where one hiker's curiosity had changed everything. Months later, Arjun received a letter from the Historical Society, thanking him for his honesty and courage. They invited him to the opening ceremony of the restored mansion. When he arrived, the place looked different. The walls were cleaned, the gardens were rebuilt, and the hall was filled with people. Photographs of the discovery were displayed on the walls. In one corner stood the same family portrait he had touched to open the hidden staircase. It now had a small plaque beneath it telling visitors how the secret had been found. As Arjun walked through the rooms, he felt proud, but also humble. He had not come looking for treasure, but for peace and nature, yet he had found a forgotten truth. People came to him shaking his hand and asking about his experience. He told them how fear had turned to courage and how silence had turned to discovery. That day he understood something deep about life. Sometimes the path that scares you the most leads you to something greater than you can imagine. When the ceremony ended and the lights dimmed, Arjun stepped outside into the quiet night. The stars were shining above the forest and the wind carried the scent of pine. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the peaceful sound of the woods. The mansion was behind him, but its story would stay with him forever. He had entered it as a simple hiker and left as the man who brought light to a forgotten part of history. As he walked down the hill, he looked at the dark outlines of the trees and smiled. The forest no longer felt lonely. It felt alive and full of whispers of the past. He promised himself that he would keep exploring new places and keep finding stories that waited in silence. The adventure had ended, but the spirit of discovery would live on in his heart forever.